Sarah's hands shook as she knelt beside the massive femur, her paleontology training overriding 3 months of survival instinct. The bone was enormous, easily 6 feet long and pristine white, without the typical yellowing or mineral staining she'd expect from ancient remains. She pulled out her phone's flashlight, scanning the skeleton methodically despite the other bidders shuffling past the open unit behind her. "You gonna be long in there, lady?" The auctioneer's voice carried irritation. "We got 12 more units to get through. Just give me a minute." Sarah's voice cracked. She hadn't spoken to anyone but her daughter Lily in days, and her throat felt raw from disuse. "I need to see what I bought." The skeleton was arranged too perfectly. Real mammoth remains were usually scattered, broken, buried in sediment layers that told stories spanning millennia. This specimen lay assembled like a museum display, each bone positioned with anatomical precision. Sarah ran her fingers along the skull's temporal fossa, feeling for the natural ridges and wear patterns that authenticated ancient bones. What she found made her stomach drop. Tiny drill holes, perfect circular marks where someone had extracted bone samples, the kind of precise extraction points she'd seen in modern genetic research labs. "Ma'am, you need to move along." A security guard appeared at the unit entrance, arms crossed, other folks waiting. Sarah scrambled to her feet, mind racing. She owned this now, whatever this was. $50 for what could be the discovery of a lifetime, or evidence of something far more sinister. The logical part of her brain screamed that mammoth remains belonged in institutions, not storage units. The desperate part whispered that this skeleton could be her ticket out of sleeping in parking lots and counting quarters for her daughter's meals. "I need a truck," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice, "to move my furniture." The security guard glanced at the massive bones. "That's some interesting furniture you got there." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in her battered Honda Civic outside the storage facility, staring at the unit key in her palm. Through the windshield, she could see Lily sleeping in the passenger seat, backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. 3 months of this nomadic existence had taught her daughter to sleep anywhere, anytime, a survival skill no 8-year-old should need. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her ex-husband David. Lily's school called. "She hasn't been in class for 2 weeks. I'm filing for full custody." The familiar panic squeezed her chest. David lived in a 4-bedroom house in Santa Barbara now, complete with a new wife and stability Sarah couldn't provide. The custody hearing was next month, and she had nothing to show for herself except a growing collection of rejection letters from every museum, university, and research facility on the West Coast. No one wanted to hire the professor who'd allegedly falsified carbon dating results. No one except, apparently, whoever had hidden a perfectly preserved mammoth skeleton in a Bakersfield storage unit. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the lab where her career had imploded. Dr. Marcus Webb, her department head, standing behind her computer screen with that satisfied smirk. The fabricated data that someone had planted in her files, the hearing where she'd tried to explain how radiocarbon readings could be manipulated, how someone with access could frame her for academic fraud. "Results don't lie, Dr. Chen," Webb had said. "Unlike some people. But what if results could lie? What if someone wanted her discredited badly enough to destroy her life?" Lily stirred in her sleep, mumbling about being hungry. Sarah checked her phone, 4:47 p.m. They had maybe 3 hours before the parking lot security would chase them off for loitering, and she needed to figure out their next move. The skeleton represented possibilities, dangerous ones. Her old lab access card was tucked in her wallet, probably deactivated by now. But Dr. Kim Rodriguez in the geology department owed her a favor from their graduate school days. If Sarah could get bone samples to Kim's carbon dating equipment after hours, she could determine exactly how old those mammoth remains really were. The wind picked up again, rattling the car windows. Sarah watched the storage facility's lights flicker on as dusk approached, casting long shadows between the units. Unit 247 sat in those shadows now, holding secrets that could either vindicate her or destroy what remained of her life. She thought about the tool marks on the bones, the precise arrangement, the impossible preservation. Someone had spent significant time and resources on that skeleton, someone with access to advanced laboratory equipment and genetic extraction technology, someone who clearly hadn't expected their storage bill to go unpaid. Sarah started the engine, decision crystallizing in her mind. She'd spent 3 months running from her past. Maybe it was time to run toward her future instead, even if that future led straight into the nightmare waiting in Unit 247. "Mummy?" Lily's voice was small and sleepy. "Are we going home?" Sarah reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Soon, baby. We're going home soon." She hoped it wasn't a lie. The McDonald's on Ming Avenue became their dining room by default. Sarah counted out quarters and dimes at the counter, acutely aware of the teenager behind the register watching her pile coins with barely concealed impatience. 57 cents short for 2 Happy Meals. "Just one," Sarah said quietly, sliding the money forward. "And a water cup." Lily didn't complain when Sarah broke the chicken nuggets in half, giving her daughter the larger portions. She never complained anymore, a resignation that broke Sarah's heart more than any tantrum could. At 8 years old, Lily had learned to make herself small, to need less, to accept whatever scraps of normalcy her mother could provide. "The playground's broken," Lily observed, pointing through the window at the rusted equipment wrapped in caution tape. "We'll find a better one tomorrow," Sarah promised, though she had no idea where they'd be tomorrow. The storage unit key pressed against her thigh through her jeans pocket, a cold reminder of the impossible choice ahead of her. Her phone buzzed with another message from David's lawyer, Mrs. Chen. "We need to schedule a deposition regarding your current living situation. Please respond within 48 hours. Sarah deleted it, without reading the full message. She'd been avoiding depositions for weeks, knowing that any honest answer about their living situation would hand David everything he needed. "Where do you currently reside, Dr. Chen? What is your daughter's mailing address? Can you provide 3 months of utility bills?" The truth was sleeping in parking lots, showering at truck stops, and teaching Lily multiplication tables by the light of convenience store windows. "Mommy, are you going to eat?" Lily pushed half her apple slices across the sticky table. Sarah forced herself to take one, chewing mechanically while her mind wandered to the lab, her real lab, before everything went wrong. She could still smell the chemical preservatives, hear the gentle hum of the carbon dating equipment. Dr. Martinez would let her bring Lily to work on weekends sometimes, and her daughter would sit quietly in the corner, coloring while Sarah analyzed bone samples that told stories spanning thousands of years. Those weekend visits felt like ancient history now. "I drew this for you," Lily said, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack. The drawing showed 2 stick figures standing next to what looked like a house, a real house with windows and a door and smoke coming from the chimney. Sarah's throat tightened. "It's beautiful, baby. That's our house, when we get one." Lily's matter-of-fact tone made it worse somehow. "Mrs. Patterson says everyone deserves a house." Mrs. Patterson, their last landlord, before the eviction notice and the scramble to pack their lives into garbage bags. She'd been kind, even apologetic, but kindness didn't pay overdue rent. The McDonald's manager started stacking chairs on tables around them. Closing time. Sarah checked her phone, 9:17 p.m. Late enough that Kim might still be in the lab running her own after-hours experiments. Early enough that Sarah could drive back to the storage facility and extract bone samples without drawing attention. "Where are we sleeping tonight?" Lily asked, gathering her crayons with practiced efficiency. Sarah had scouted 3 parking lots earlier, a 24-hour Walmart, a truck stop near the highway in the back corner of a hospital parking garage, all places where a beat-up Honda wouldn't draw immediate suspicion, all places where her daughter would curl up in the back seat with a blanket that smelled like their old life. Somewhere safe, Sarah said, which was code for nowhere permanent. They drove through Bakersfield's industrial district as the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. past auto repair shops and fast food restaurants, past the university campus where Sarah had once believed she'd spend her entire career. The familiar ache of loss pressed against her ribs, not just for her job but for the future she'd planned. The research projects half finished, the graduate students she'd abandoned, the life's work that had been stripped away with 3 fabricated data points. Someone had destroyed her deliberately. Someone with access to her files, her research, her lab. Someone who'd wanted Dr. Sarah Chen discredited and forgotten. But they'd made one mistake. They'd underestimated her desperation. Sarah parked outside the storage facility and stared at the security fence. Lily was already asleep in the passenger seat, thumb tucked under her chin the way she'd done since she was a baby. 3 months of uncertainty, and her daughter still trusted her to figure it out somehow. The Mammoth skeleton waited in Unit 247 like a question mark made of bone. Ancient or modern, authentic or fabricated, it represented the first real mystery Sarah had encountered since losing her lab. The first chance to be a scientist again, instead of just a homeless woman counting quarters. Her old access card sat in her wallet next to their last $20 bill. Kim Rodriguez owed her a favor, but favors had expiration dates. Time to find out if hers had expired. Sarah sat in the darkness for another 10 minutes, watching the storage facility's lone security guard make his rounds. The man moved with the sluggish rhythm of someone paid minimum wage to care minimally, perfect for what she needed to do. Lily's breathing had settled into the deep cadence of exhaustion. 3 months of sleeping in cars had taught her daughter to find rest anywhere, but Sarah could see the dark circles under her eyes even in the dim parking lot light. Every night like this was another piece of evidence for David's custody case, another reason why Lily deserved better than a mother who'd lost everything. The skeleton samples had to come first. Sarah eased out of the driver's seat, careful not to wake Lily, and retrieved her old field kit from the trunk. The leather case still smelled like the Mojave dig sites where she'd spent her graduate summers back when discovering the past felt like the most important thing in the world. The storage unit's metal door rolled up with a grinding shriek that made Sarah's teeth clench. She clicked on her flashlight, and the mammoth bones materialized from the shadows like something from a fever dream. In the harsh lead beam, she could see details she'd missed during the auction. The pristine condition of the rib cage, the way the vertebrae aligned with surgical precision, the complete absence of the mineral deposits that should accumulate over millennia. Sarah knelt beside the skull and opened her field kit. The dental drill felt foreign in her hands after months of disuse, but muscle memory guided her movements as she extracted thin core samples from the temporal bone. The drill bits glided through with unsettling ease. Ancient bone should be harder, more brittle. Her phone buzzed. "David again, Sarah, I know you're avoiding my calls. We need to talk about Lily's future. This can't continue." She silenced the phone and focused on her work, carefully labeling each sample vial with location markers. Temporal bone, femur shaft, molar root, enough material for comprehensive carbon dating if Kim's equipment was still operational. That's when she heard it. Car engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Sarah killed her flashlight and moved to the unit's entrance. 3 black SUVs were pulling into the storage facility's main gate, their headlights sweeping across the numbered units. No one visited storage facilities at 10 p.m. unless they were looking for something specific, or someone. The vehicles moved with purpose, not the random pattern of late-night customers. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the coordinated formation, federal agents. She'd seen enough government raids during her university days to recognize the signature approach. They weren't here by coincidence. Sarah grabbed her sample vials and field kit, mind racing through possibilities. Someone knew about the skeleton, someone with enough influence to mobilize federal resources in the middle of the night, someone who'd been watching, waiting for exactly this moment. The SUVs were 2 blocks away now, their headlights growing brighter. Sarah rolled down the unit door as quietly as possible and sprinted toward her Honda. Lily was still sleeping, oblivious to the danger approaching. Sarah's hands shook as she started the engine. The bone samples sat in her field kit on the passenger floor, evidence of something impossible, something that had drawn federal attention within hours of her discovery. Whatever was buried in that storage unit went far deeper than academic fraud or stolen research. This was government-level secrecy. As she pulled out of the parking lot, Sarah caught a glimpse of the SUVs in her rearview mirror. They moved like sharks, sensing blood, converging on Unit 247 with predatory precision. Radio chatter crackled from their windows, fragments about containment and asset recovery that made her stomach clench. Lily stirred as they accelerated onto the main road. "Mommy? Where are we going?" "The university," Sarah said, surprising herself with the decision. "We're going to visit an old friend." Dr. Kim Rodriguez had been her roommate during graduate school, back when they'd spent 18-hour days in the lab and believed they could unlock the planet's secrets through careful analysis and peer review. Kim specialized in isotope geochemistry now, with access to the same carbon dating equipment that had destroyed Sarah's career. If the Mammoth bones were truly ancient, Kim's tests would prove it. If they were modern, impossibly, inexplicably modern, then Sarah would have evidence of something that defied natural law. Either way, she'd finally have answers. The university campus loomed ahead, its familiar brick buildings casting long shadows under the streetlights. Sarah had walked these paths for 7 years, first as a graduate student hungry for discovery, then as a professor building what she'd believed was an unshakable career. Now she was returning as a fugitive, with stolen bone samples and federal agents in pursuit. The call to adventure, Sarah realized, hadn't been finding the skeleton. It had been the moment she decided to fight back against the forces that had destroyed her life. The moment she chose truth over safety, answers over anonymity, even if those answers led somewhere she wasn't prepared to go. Sarah parked behind the chemistry building, her hands still trembling on the steering wheel. The bone samples sat in her field kit like evidence of a crime she didn't understand, and every instinct screamed at her to turn around, drive to the nearest police station, and surrender everything to someone with actual authority. But authority had failed her before. "Stay here, baby," she whispered to Lily, who was stirring in the passenger seat. "I'll be right back." The lie tasted bitter. She had no idea what she was walking into or whether she'd be walking back out. The federal agents converging on the storage facility suggested this went far beyond academic curiosity. This was the kind of discovery that made people disappear. Sarah's old access card trembled in her hand as she approached the geology building's side entrance. 3 months since her termination, 3 months for the university to scrub her from their systems. The card reader blinked red, then red again. Denied. She closed her eyes, fighting back the familiar wave of helplessness. Even here, in the place where she'd spent the best years of her career, she was an outsider now. A fraud, a cautionary tale whispered in faculty meetings. Footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Sarah pressed herself against the building's brick wall, heart hammering as a campus security guard rounded the corner. If he found her here after hours with no legitimate business, it would take exactly 1 phone call to connect her to the storage facility incident. 1 call to ensure she never saw Lily again. The guard passed without looking in her direction, but his presence reinforced the terrible reality. She was completely alone in this. No colleagues to consult, no institutional backing, no safety net between her and whatever forces had buried an impossible mammoth skeleton in a Bakersfield storage unit. Through the building's windows, she could see lights in Kim's 3rd-floor lab. Her old friend was there, probably running isotope analyses on rock samples, oblivious to the fact that her former roommate was lurking outside like a common criminal. Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at Kim's contact information. 1 call, and she could explain everything: the storage auction, the skeleton, the federal agents, the bone samples that might rewrite everything they thought they knew about extinction and resurrection. Kim would listen. Kim would help. Kim would also be legally obligated to report her. The weight of that realization settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. Even her oldest friend had become a potential threat, another person who might choose institutional loyalty over personal connection. The university had policies about unauthorized research, about bringing unvetted materials into their labs, policies designed to protect people like Kim from people like Sarah. Her phone buzzed with another message from David's lawyer, Mrs. Chen. Failure to respond will be interpreted as abandonment of parental rights. Please consider your daughter's well-being. Lily's well-being. The words cut deeper than any legal threat. Sarah thought about her daughter sleeping in the car, backpack clutched against her chest, trusting her mother to somehow fix their shattered life. What kind of well-being could Sarah provide? Nights in parking lots, meals divided in half, a future measured in remaining quarters and rejection letters? Maybe David was right. Maybe Lily deserved better than a mother chasing impossible theories with stolen bone samples. The doubt crept through Sarah's resolve like poison, undermining everything she'd convinced herself about fighting back and seeking truth. What if the skeleton was exactly what it appeared to be, an ancient mammoth, somehow preserved, somehow overlooked by legitimate researchers? What if the federal response was standard protocol for protecting archaeological sites? What if her paranoia was just the logical endpoint of 3 months spent looking over her shoulder, waiting for the next catastrophe? What if she was about to destroy the last fragments of her credibility chasing shadows? Sarah looked back toward her car, where Lily's small form was visible through the rear window. Her daughter had been patient through every disaster, every displacement, every broken promise about tomorrow being better. She deserved a mother who made rational decisions based on evidence, not desperation. The smart choice was obvious. Drive to the police station, turn over the bone samples, explain about the storage auction, and let proper authorities handle whatever came next. Accept David's custody arrangement, find a minimum wage job, rebuild slowly and carefully within the bounds of her new reality. The safe choice was surrender. But as Sarah stared at the geology building's lit windows, she remembered the precision of those drill holes in the mammoth skull, the surgical arrangement of bones that defied natural preservation, the coordinated federal response that suggested someone powerful wanted this discovery contained. Someone had framed her once before, destroyed her career with fabricated evidence, someone who clearly underestimated her capacity for survival. The bone samples in her field kit represented more than scientific curiosity. They were proof that she'd been right to question everything, right to suspect that her downfall had been orchestrated, right to fight back. Sarah took a deep breath and approached the building's service entrance, where Kim always left a window unlocked for late-night sample collection. Some questions demanded answers, regardless of the cost. The service window slid open with a soft scrape of metal on metal, just as it had during countless late-night sample runs in graduate school. Sarah hoisted herself through the narrow opening, her field kit clutched against her chest like a lifeline. Her feet hit the linoleum floor of the geology building's basement, and the familiar smell of chemical preservatives and old rock dust flooded her senses. There was no going back now. The hallways felt like a museum of her former life, bulletin boards still displaying research announcements she'd helped draft, equipment she'd calibrated, floor tiles she'd worn smooth during 7 years of purposeful strides toward a future that no longer existed. But tonight, those memories felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Tonight, she was an intruder carrying evidence that could rewrite the laws of nature itself. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the stairwell as she climbed toward Kim's lab. Each floor brought her further from the safety of retreat, deeper into a commitment she couldn't undo. Behind her, through the building's windows, she could see the parking lot where Lily slept in the car, her daughter's trust serving as both anchor and weight, pulling Sarah forward and holding her back simultaneously. The third-floor corridor stretched ahead like a gauntlet. Kim's lab occupied the corner suite, its frosted glass door glowing with the warm light of after-hours research. Sarah could hear the familiar hum of spectrometers and the soft click of keyboard keys, sounds that had once represented comfort and belonging, now transformed into reminders of everything she'd lost. She pressed her palm against the door, feeling the weight of her decision crystallize. Once she crossed this threshold, she would officially be a criminal. Breaking and entering, theft of laboratory services, unauthorized research on potentially stolen materials. The charges would pile up like sedimentary layers, each one making it harder to climb back to legitimacy. But legitimacy was a luxury she could no longer afford. The door handle turned easily in her hand. Kim had always been trusting about lab security, believing that passion for discovery created its own protection. Sarah slipped inside, her pulse hammering against her throat as she took in the familiar chaos of an active research space. Computers hummed in the darkness, their screensavers painting moving patterns across walls lined with geological charts and sample catalogues. This was where her old life ended and her new one truly began. Kim looked up from her workstation, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips, eyes widening in recognition and confusion. "Sarah? What are you doing here? I thought you were—" "I need your help," Sarah interrupted, setting her field kit on the nearest lab bench. "I need carbon dating analysis, and I need you to not ask questions until you see the results." The request hung in the air between them, like a chemical reaction waiting for the right catalyst. Kim set down her coffee with deliberate care, and Sarah could see her friend's mind working through the implications. The terminated professor, the after-hours break-in, the desperate edge in Sarah's voice. "Sarah, you can't just—" "Someone framed me." The words came out in a rush, 3 months of suppressed certainty finally finding voice. The data manipulation, the fabricated results, it was all planted. Someone wanted me discredited, and now I know why. Sarah opened her field kit, revealing the bone samples in their labeled vials. Under the lab's fluorescent lights, the fragments looked innocuous enough, small cores of what appeared to be ancient bone material, the kind of specimens that passed through the geology department every week. But Sarah knew better. These came from a complete mammoth skeleton, perfectly preserved, surgically arranged, with drill holes that suggest modern extraction techniques. She met Kim's eyes, seeing her own desperation reflected there. "I need to know how old they really are." Kim moved closer, her scientific curiosity warring with professional caution. "Where did you get these?" "Sarah, if you've taken materials from an active dig site—" "A storage auction in Bakersfield, $50. The absurdity of it struck Sarah again, the idea that earth-shattering discoveries could be hidden behind the mundane facade of unpaid storage fees. Someone wanted this skeleton buried, Kim, someone with enough power to bring in federal agents. That detail landed with visible impact. Kim's eyebrows rose, and Sarah could see her friend beginning to understand the scope of what she was asking. This wasn't just about academic curiosity or career rehabilitation. This was about truth that someone powerful wanted to remain hidden. "If I run these samples," Kim said slowly, "and they come back with impossible results, then we'll know I'm not crazy." The lab fell silent, except for the steady hum of equipment. Sarah watched her oldest friend wrestle with a decision that would define both of their futures. Safety in ignorance or knowledge that might destroy them both. Kim reached for the first sample vial. "Let's find out what you've really discovered." The carbon dating machine hummed to life with a sound Sarah remembered from countless late nights in graduate school, a mechanical purr that had once represented the excitement of discovery. Now it felt ominous, like machinery grinding toward an inevitable collision with truth. Kim's hands moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the bone samples with the same methodical precision that had made her the geology department's most trusted researcher. But Sarah could see tension in the set of her friend's shoulders, the way she avoided eye contact while adjusting the spectrometer settings. "This will take 6 hours for preliminary results," Kim said, her voice carefully neutral. "Comprehensive analysis needs 12. "We don't have 12 hours. Sarah moved to the window, scanning the parking lot below. Her Honda sat under a broken streetlight, Lily's sleeping form barely visible through the tinted glass. "The federal agents who hit the storage facility, they'll connect me to this eventually." "Federal agents?" Kim's coffee cup clattered against the lab bench. "Sarah, what exactly have you stumbled into? Before Sarah could answer, the building's main entrance lit up with approaching headlights. Not the slow patrol of campus security, but the purposeful advance of vehicles that knew exactly where they were going. Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized the coordinated formation. 3 black SUVs, the same ones that had converged on Unit 247. "They found me," she whispered. Kim moved to the window, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Those aren't university vehicles." Radio chatter echoed from the parking lot below, fragments about containment protocols and asset recovery that made Sarah's hands shake. The federal response wasn't random or bureaucratic. It was surgical, targeted, designed to neutralize a specific threat. "I have to go." Sarah grabbed her field kit, mind racing through escape routes. The service window was too far. The main stairwells would be monitored. "Kim, if they ask about the samples..." "What samples?" Kim's response came without hesitation, and Sarah felt a rush of gratitude so intense it threatened to overwhelm her composure. "I've been running isotope analyses on sedimentary cores all night. Nothing else." Sarah squeezed her friend's hand, then moved toward the lab's emergency exit. But Kim caught her arm, eyes reflecting the same scientific curiosity that had driven them through graduate school together. "Sarah, before you go, those drill holes you mentioned, what kind of pattern? Surgical? Precise? Like someone was extracting tissue samples?" Kim's face went ashen. "From prehistoric bone? That's impossible unless..." She trailed off, but Sarah could see understanding dawning in her expression. The implications were staggering. Genetic material preserved in mammoth bone, extraction techniques that suggested active research rather than archaeological study. "Unless someone was harvesting DNA," Sarah finished, "someone with the resources to keep mammoth genetic material viable." The words hung between them like a revelation and a curse. They both knew the theoretical framework. Scientists had been discussing mammoth resurrection for decades, limited only by the degradation of genetic material in truly ancient specimens. But if someone had access to recently deceased mammoth tissue... Footsteps echoed in the building's main corridor, heavy boots, multiple personnel moving with military precision toward the geology wing. Time was running out. "The emergency stairs," Kim whispered, pointing toward the lab's rear exit. "They lead to the service tunnel. You can reach the parking structure without being seen." Sarah nodded, but hesitated at the doorway. "Kim, when those results come back, I'll find a way to get them to you." "But Sarah..." Kim's voice carried a weight that made Sarah turn back. "If those bones really are only months old, if someone is actually bringing back extinct species, this goes way beyond academic fraud. This is the kind of discovery that governments kill to protect." The simple truth of that statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been thinking in terms of career rehabilitation and personal vindication, but Kim was right. She'd stumbled into something that transcended individual concerns, something that could reshape humanity's relationship with extinction itself. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the mechanical click of equipment being deployed. Containment gear, Sarah realized. Whatever they thought she'd discovered, they were treating it as a biological hazard. "Promise me something," Sarah said. "If anything happens to me, make sure Lily is safe. Don't let her become collateral damage in whatever this is." Kim nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Go. I'll buy you as much time as I can." Sarah slipped through the emergency exit into the service corridor, her field kit clutched against her chest. Behind her, she could hear Kim adjusting equipment, creating the sounds of legitimate research to mask the traces of their conversation. Ahead lay the unknown territory of a world where extinct species could be resurrected, where federal agents monitored storage auctions, where a homeless mother's $50 gamble had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened to rewrite the laws of nature itself. She was no longer just fighting for her reputation or her daughter's future. She was fighting for truth in a world where truth had become the most dangerous weapon of all. The service corridor stretched ahead like a concrete throat, swallowing Sarah into its fluorescent-lit darkness. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on industrial pipes and electrical conduits, creating a maze of potential hiding spots and dead ends. Her footsteps echoed despite her efforts to move quietly, each sound amplifying her growing panic. Behind her, muffled voices penetrated the emergency door, Kim's calm responses to increasingly aggressive questioning. Sarah's chest tightened as she realized her friend was already paying the price for helping her. The weight of that guilt added another layer to the crushing responsibility she carried. Lily sleeping in the car, trusting her mother to return safely, Kim facing federal interrogation, her own desperate flight through a building that had once represented everything she'd worked toward. The service tunnel Kim had mentioned appeared around the next corner, a narrow maintenance passage that connected the geology building to the parking structure. Sarah squeezed through the access door, her field kit scraping against the metal frame. The tunnel was pitch black, forcing her to feel her way along rough concrete walls while fighting the claustrophobic sensation of being buried alive. Her phone buzzed against her ribs. A text from an unknown number, Dr. Chen. "We know what you found. We can help." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message again. Someone else knew about the Mammoth skeleton, someone with access to her phone number despite her efforts to stay off the grid. The timing felt too convenient. Federal agents in the building, mysterious offers of help appearing in her darkest moment. Every instinct screamed trap. But as she emerged from the tunnel into the parking structure's dim lighting, another possibility occurred to her. What if she wasn't the only person who had discovered something impossible? What if other people were asking the same questions about genetic resurrection, about powerful interests that preferred extinct species to remain that way? The Honda sat where she'd left it, Lily's small form still curled in the back seat. Sarah approached carefully, scanning the shadows between concrete pillars for signs of surveillance. The federal agents had been focused on the geology building, but they would expand their search perimeter quickly. She had minutes, maybe less, before this temporary sanctuary became another trap. She slipped into the driver's seat, her movements careful not to wake Lily. Her daughter stirred, but didn't open her eyes, and Sarah felt the familiar ache of love mixed with terror. Everything she did from this point forward would determine whether Lily grew up with a mother or became another casualty of whatever conspiracy had swallowed that mammoth skeleton. The mysterious phone number blinked at her from the screen. Sarah stared at it, weighing impossible choices. Trust a stranger who somehow knew her deepest secret, or continue running with no destination and dwindling resources. She typed back, "Who are you?" The response came immediately, someone who lost everything because they asked the wrong questions about the right discoveries. Unit 247 wasn't the first. It won't be the last. Sarah's blood chilled. Someone else knew about the storage unit, about the auction, about the skeleton hidden beneath moldy furniture and forgotten belongings. Someone who understood exactly what she had stumbled into. "Meet me," the message continued. "Denny's on Highway 99, 30 minutes. Come alone, but bring your samples. Time is running out for both of us." Through the Honda's rear window, Sarah could see lights moving through the geology building, systematic searches floor by floor. The federal team was being thorough, treating this like a manhunt rather than a routine investigation. They expected her to be desperate, cornered, making predictable mistakes. Maybe it was time to be unpredictable. Sarah started the engine, keeping the headlights off as she navigated toward the parking structure's exit. Lily murmured something in her sleep about dinosaurs coming back to life, and Sarah's throat constricted. Her daughter's innocent words felt like prophecy now, a child's imagination accidentally touching the edge of impossible reality. As they emerged onto the street, Sarah caught sight of the federal vehicles surrounding the geology building. More had arrived, 6 SUVs now, plus what looked like a mobile command center. The scale of the response confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't about archaeological protocols or university regulations. This was about something much larger and infinitely more dangerous. The mysterious contact was right about one thing: time was running out. For her, for Lily, for anyone who had glimpsed the truth behind that perfectly preserved mammoth skeleton. Sarah pressed the accelerator and headed toward Highway 99, toward a meeting with someone who claimed to understand her nightmare. Behind her, the geology building blazed with lights as federal agents continued their search. Ahead lay the unknown territory of potential allies who might be enemies, of truths that could save or destroy everything she loved. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter and drove into the darkness, carrying bone samples that could rewrite the laws of nature and the growing certainty that her $50 gamble had uncovered something that powerful people would kill to protect. The approach was beginning, and there would be no turning back. The Denny's parking lot stretched under harsh sodium lights, half empty at this hour, but offering no comfort of solitude. Sarah pulled the Honda into a space near the back, her hands still shaking from the 20-minute drive of constant mirror checking and route changes. Every pair of headlights had felt like pursuit, every police cruiser a potential end to her desperate flight. Lily remained asleep in the back seat, her breathing steady and trusting. Sarah studied her daughter's peaceful face and felt the crushing weight of maternal failure. 3 months ago they'd had an apartment, regular meals, the promise of stability. Now she was dragging her 8-year-old into a nightmare involving federal manhunts and genetic conspiracies that sounded like science fiction. "What kind of mother am I?" she whispered to the darkness. "The kind who uncovers truth that powerful people want buried," a voice in her head replied. "The kind who refuses to let injustice stand unchallenged, even when challenge means risking everything." Through the restaurant's windows, Sarah spotted her contact immediately, a woman in her 50s, sitting alone in a corner booth, nervously rotating a coffee cup between her hands. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, according to the follow-up text, former genetics researcher at Stanford, terminated 18 months ago under circumstances that sounded disturbingly familiar. Sarah locked the Honda and activated the car alarm, praying that Lily would sleep through whatever revelation awaited inside. The field kit felt impossibly heavy as she crossed the parking lot, each step carrying her further from the illusion of safety and deeper into a conspiracy that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. The restaurant's fluorescent lighting made everything look sickly and surreal. Dr. Rodriguez looked up as Sarah approached, and the recognition in her eyes was immediate and terrifying. This wasn't a chance encounter or mistaken identity. Rodriguez had been watching, waiting, planning for this moment. Dr. Chen Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of shared trauma. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would trust a stranger." "I'm not sure I do." Sarah slid into the opposite seat, keeping the field kit close. "But federal agents just raided my former workplace looking for me, so normal caution seems inadequate." Rodriguez's laugh was bitter. "Normal caution became irrelevant the moment you opened Unit 247. You've seen what they're hiding, haven't you? The perfectly preserved specimens, the surgical extraction marks, the impossible preservation of genetic material?" Sarah's throat constricted. "How do you know about the extraction marks?" "Because I've seen them before. Unit 247 wasn't the first storage facility they used for disposal. When genetic resurrection experiments go wrong, when specimens become inconvenient evidence, they have protocols for making problems disappear." Rodriguez leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperate intensity. "Tell me about the carbon dating. Did you manage to get samples tested?" "The tests are running now, 6 hours for preliminary results. You won't live to see them if they find you first." Rodriguez's bluntness hit like a physical blow. The federal response isn't about regulatory compliance or archaeological protection. It's about preventing public knowledge of Project Lazarus, a genetic resurrection program that's been operating in secret for over 3 years. The name landed with devastating clarity. Project Lazarus. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Government funding, classified research, the systematic elimination of anyone who stumbled too close to the truth. Her academic firing, the fabricated evidence, the destruction of her reputation, all designed to discredit her before she could discover something that mattered. "How many people know about this?" Sarah asked. "Fewer each month. Rodriguez's voice carried the hollow tone of someone who'd watched colleagues disappear. The researchers who developed the technology have been reassigned to classified projects. The technicians who handled specimens have suffered convenient accidents. The oversight committee members have been transferred to different agencies. Sarah felt the floor of her reality cracking beneath her. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about the systematic suppression of the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. They've successfully resurrected multiple extinct species, Sarah. Not just mammoths, saber-tooth, cats, cave bears, possibly even earlier hominid specimens, but something went wrong with the control protocols. The restaurant seemed to spin around Sarah as the magnitude of Rodriguez's claims settled into her consciousness. Genetic resurrection wasn't theoretical anymore. It was operational, active, producing results that required federal containment teams and witness elimination protocols. Specimens in Storage Unit 247, Rodriguez continued. Those were disposal materials from a mammoth that became problematic. They couldn't maintain behavioral control, couldn't prevent it from demonstrating intelligence patterns that exceeded their projections. You're telling me they killed a living mammoth because it was too smart? I'm telling you they killed a living mammoth because it remembered being extinct. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, rewriting everything Sarah thought she understood about life, death, and the boundaries between them. Outside, Lily slept peacefully in the Honda, dreaming of dinosaurs coming back to life while her mother learned that nightmares could indeed become reality. Sarah stared at Rodriguez across the sticky formica table, her mind struggling to process words that defied every scientific principle she understood. A resurrected mammoth that remembered extinction. The concept was so fundamentally impossible that her academic training rebelled against it. That's not how memory works, she whispered. Genetic material doesn't carry conscious experience. You can't resurrect memories along with tissue. Can't you? Rodriguez's eyes held the haunted look of someone who'd witnessed the impossible. What if consciousness leaves traces in neural pathways that survive cellular death? What if resurrection technology captures more than just DNA sequences? Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Kim's lab number. Her heart leaped, the carbon dating results 6 hours early. But as she reached for the device, Rodriguez's hand clamped down on her wrist with surprising strength. Don't answer that. But it's my friend. The test results. It's not your friend anymore. Rodriguez's voice carried absolute certainty. They have the lab under complete surveillance now. Anyone who helps you becomes a liability they'll eliminate. Sarah's blood turned to ice as the phone continued buzzing. Through the restaurant window, she could see the Honda's interior light, Lily stirring in the back seat, probably awakened by the sound. Her daughter's small face appeared at the window, looking around in confusion for her mother. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. They're using your friend as bait, Rodriguez said. Standard protocol. Make you think you're getting the evidence you need, then trace the call and triangulate your position. Sarah's chest constricted as the full magnitude of her situation crashed over her. Kim was in federal custody, her carbon dating samples were compromised, and she was sitting in a public restaurant with a woman who claimed impossible things about resurrected mammoths while her 8-year-old daughter waited alone in a locked car. I have to get Lily. Sarah started to stand, but Rodriguez grabbed her arm again. Look at the parking lot. Really look. Sarah followed her gaze and felt her world collapse. 3 additional vehicles had entered the lot while they'd been talking. A white panel van near the entrance, a sedan positioned to block the rear exit, and a motorcycle that had pulled up alongside a maintenance dumpster. The positioning was too strategic to be coincidental. They'd found her. The back exit, Sarah breathed. There is no back exit that isn't covered. Rodriguez's voice held the resignation of someone who'd run this scenario before. They've been tracking your phone since you left the university. The mysterious text messages, the helpful contact information, all designed to drive you to exactly this location. The crushing realization hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been manipulated from the moment she'd discovered the Mammoth skeleton. The storage auction, the suspicious auction house records, even Dr. Rodriguez herself, all pieces in an elaborate trap designed to neutralize a threat they'd identified weeks ago. "You're working for them." Sarah's voice came out as a whisper of betrayal. Rodriguez's expression crumpled. "I was, initially. They threatened my grandchildren, Sarah, 8 and 6 years old, just like your daughter. They said cooperation was the only way to keep them safe." Tears began streaming down her face. "But I've watched too many good people disappear. I can't do this anymore." Through the window, Sarah could see men in dark clothing emerging from the vehicles. Professional, coordinated, moving with the precision of a military operation. But her attention fixed on the Honda, where Lily's face pressed against the glass in growing panic as strange men approached her temporary sanctuary. "My daughter," Sarah gasped, starting toward the door. "They won't hurt her," Rodriguez said desperately. "Children aren't eliminated. They're relocated. New identities, foster families with security clearances. She'll be safe, but she'll never see you again." The words hit Sarah like bullets. They were going to steal her daughter, erase her existence, make Lily another casualty of a conspiracy that protected impossible secrets about genetic resurrection and mammoth memories. Everything she'd fought for, her reputation, her research, her future, had been systematically destroyed to prevent her from uncovering a truth that powerful people would kill to protect. Outside, the federal team had reached the Honda. One agent knelt beside the driver's side window, speaking to Lily in what appeared to be calm, reassuring tones. Another positioned himself to prevent any attempt at vehicle pursuit. A third moved toward the restaurant entrance. Sarah watched her daughter's terrified face and felt something inside her shatter completely. The $50 storage auction that was supposed to save their lives had instead destroyed everything they had left. Lily would grow up believing her mother had abandoned her, never knowing about mammoth skeletons or genetic conspiracies or the impossible choice between truth and family. The restaurant door opened with a soft electronic chime. Sarah's phone buzzed one final time with a text from Kim's number. "Results are in. You were right about everything. I'm sorry." Then the screen went black, and Sarah Chen, former paleontology professor, homeless mother, discoverer of impossible truths, realized that some victories cost everything worth living for. The federal agent who entered the restaurant looked nothing like Sarah had expected. Instead of the black-suited government operative from her panicked imagination, a woman in her 40s approached their booth. Someone who could have been a soccer mom or high school principal. Her expression held no menace, only a profound weariness that Sarah recognized from her own mirror. "Dr. Chen," the woman said, sliding uninvited into the booth beside Rodriguez. "My name is Agent Patricia Wells. Before you say anything, I need you to understand that your daughter is perfectly safe. Agent Morrison is reading her a story about dinosaurs from a book we keep in the vehicle for situations like this." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Situations like this? When brilliant scientists discover truths that could destabilize civilization itself. Wells's voice carried none of the cold authority Sarah expected. Instead, she heard exhaustion, regret, and something that sounded almost like sympathy. When mothers risk everything because they refuse to let injustice stand. Rodriguez had gone completely still, her face pale with terror or relief. Sarah couldn't tell which. "Dr. Rodriguez has told you about Project Lazarus," Wells continued. "About genetic resurrection, about mammoth memories, about the systematic suppression of evidence. All of it is true, every impossible word." The admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been prepared for denials, threats, the typical government stonewalling. But this frank acknowledgement of conspiracy felt more terrifying than any cover-up. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why are you telling me this?" Wells reached into her jacket and placed a tablet on the table between them. The screen showed surveillance footage of a vast laboratory complex, gleaming white corridors, massive containment chambers, and in the center of it all, something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. a living woolly mammoth, fully grown, pacing in agitated circles within a reinforced enclosure. But its movements weren't random animal behavior. The creature was systematically testing the barriers, pressing against specific structural points with an intelligence that seemed almost human. "That specimen is designated Lazarus-7, Wells said. "Successfully resurrected 18 months ago from genetic material similar to what you found in storage unit 247. For the first 6 months, it behaved exactly as our models predicted, a prehistoric animal adapting to modern containment." The mammoth on screen suddenly stopped pacing and looked directly into the surveillance camera. Its eyes held an awareness that sent chills down Sarah's spine, not animal instinct, but conscious recognition of being watched. Then it started remembering, Wells continued. Not just basic behavioral patterns, but specific events. The moment of its original death, the sensation of freezing in prehistoric ice, the gradual transition from consciousness to darkness that preceded extinction. Sarah's scientific mind reeled. That's impossible. Memory doesn't survive cellular death. Consciousness can't be resurrected along with tissue. We thought so too. But we were wrong about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. Wells tapped the tablet, advancing to another video. This one showed the mammoth using its trunk to manipulate objects in its enclosure, not randomly but with deliberate purpose. It had arranged debris into patterns that looked disturbingly like symbols. "Lazarus-7 isn't just alive, Dr. Chen. It's trying to communicate the experience of being extinct." The revelation crashed over Sarah like a tide of impossible reality. Everything she'd discovered, the surgical extraction marks, the suspicious carbon dating, the federal manhunt, had been protecting not just genetic resurrection technology, but proof that death itself wasn't the absolute boundary they'd believed. Other specimens showed similar patterns, Wells continued. Saber-toothed cats that exhibited post-traumatic behaviors consistent with remembering violent deaths. Cave bears that demonstrated knowledge of environmental conditions they'd never experienced. We've successfully brought back 17 extinct species, and every one of them carries psychological trauma from the moment of extinction. Rodriguez finally spoke, her voice barely audible. "That's why they need to be eliminated, not because the technology is dangerous, but because the resurrected animals are witnesses to something we're not prepared to understand." Wells nodded grimly. "Imagine the philosophical implications, Dr. Chen. If consciousness survives death and can be restored along with physical tissue, what does that mean for human mortality, for religious beliefs about afterlife, for the entire foundation of how we understand existence itself?" Through the restaurant window, Sarah could see Lily laughing at something Agent Morrison was reading. Her daughter's innocent joy contrasted sharply with the earth-shattering revelations unfolding 3 feet away. The normal world and the impossible truth existing in parallel realities. "The mammoth skeleton in Unit 247, Sarah said slowly. "It wasn't disposal of failed experiments. It was evidence of murder. It was evidence of mercy." Wells's voice cracked slightly. Lazarus-7 became increasingly agitated, increasingly traumatized by memories of extinction. It began self-harming behaviors, refusing food, exhibiting what can only be described as profound psychological suffering. The decision was made to end its distress. Sarah stared at the tablet, at the intelligent eyes of a creature that remembered dying 60,000 years ago and finally understood the true scope of what her $50 auction had uncovered. Not just genetic resurrection, but proof that death was a trauma that could echo across millennia. The question was no longer whether they could bring back the dead. It was whether the dead wanted to be brought back at all. Sarah sat in stunned silence, staring at the tablet screen where Lazarus-7's haunting gaze seemed to pierce through time itself. The weight of revelation pressed against her chest like a physical force. They had not just discovered genetic resurrection, but evidence that consciousness transcended death in ways that challenged the very foundation of existence. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To me, to Lily, to all of this? Wells exchanged a meaningful look with Rodriguez before responding. That depends entirely on what you choose to do with this information, Dr. Chen. Because you're not the only one who's tired of watching innocent people disappear. Rodriguez leaned forward, her earlier terror replaced by something resembling hope. There are others, Sarah. Scientists, technicians, even some federal personnel who believe this conspiracy has gone too far. People who think the public deserves to know that death isn't the absolute ending we've always believed. A resistance. Sarah's academic mind immediately grasped the implications. You're talking about exposing Project Lazarus. We're talking about giving you a choice, Wells corrected. The same choice we've offered to 17 other researchers who stumbled onto fragments of this truth. You can disappear into witness protection with your daughter. New identities, comfortable lives, complete safety. Or you can help us gather enough evidence to make disclosure inevitable. Through the window, Sarah watched Lily trace patterns on the car's fogged glass, while Agent Morrison continued reading. Her daughter's simple contentment felt like a reprieve from the impossible decisions swirling around her. For months, she'd fought just to keep them fed and sheltered. Now she was being asked to choose between safety and truth on a scale that could reshape human understanding of mortality itself. The others who chose disclosure, Sarah said carefully, what happened to them? Rodriguez's expression darkened. Some succeeded in gathering evidence. Others were eliminated before they could act. The conspiracy has resources we're still learning about: unlimited funding, political protection, elimination protocols that leave no traces. Wells tapped the tablet again, revealing a new screen filled with personnel files. But they also have vulnerabilities. The project requires enormous infrastructure: laboratories, containment facilities, disposal sites. Every resurrection attempt creates witnesses, generates data, leaves physical evidence. They can't eliminate everyone. Sarah studied the faces on the screen. Researchers, technicians, security personnel. All people who'd seen too much, learned too much, posed threats to secrets that powerful forces would kill to protect. But in their eyes, she recognized something familiar. The same desperate determination that had driven her to spend her last $50 on a storage unit auction. What would you need from me? She asked. Access to your original carbon dating samples, Wells replied immediately. Documentation of the extraction marks, chain of custody records from the auction house, any physical evidence that proves the Mammoth's recent death. Your paleontology expertise gives credibility to findings that other witnesses can't provide. Rodriguez pulled a secure phone from her jacket. We also need someone with your academic credentials to coordinate with remaining sympathetic researchers. Dr. Kim Martinez isn't the only lab technician willing to risk everything for truth. There are professors at universities across the country who've noticed suspicious research restrictions, funding anomalies, colleague disappearances. The scope of what they were proposing began to crystallize in Sarah's mind. Not just exposing a single conspiracy, but building a coordinated resistance capable of revealing truths that could fundamentally alter human civilization. The homeless mother who'd lost everything was being asked to become a focal point for the most significant scientific disclosure in history. If I say yes, Sarah said slowly, what guarantee do I have that Lily stays safe? Wells's expression softened. None. We can offer protection, safe houses, extraction protocols. But anyone who chooses this path accepts enormous risk. The people behind Project Lazarus have demonstrated willingness to eliminate entire families to protect their secrets. Sarah looked out at her daughter again, watching Lily's innocent fascination with the dinosaur book Agent Morrison was sharing. 8 years old, still young enough to believe in simple truths about right and wrong. Old enough to understand if her mother chose principle over safety and paid the ultimate price. But as she watched, Sarah realized something that crystallized her resolve. Lily wasn't just reading about extinct creatures. She was learning about resurrection, about impossible things becoming real, about the boundaries between death and life proving more fragile than anyone imagined. Her daughter was already living in a world where mammoth memories could survive extinction and consciousness could transcend mortality. The question wasn't whether to expose the truth. The question was whether to give Lily a future where such truths could exist without requiring the systematic murder of everyone who discovered them. Sarah reached across the table and took the secure phone from Rodriguez's hand. "Tell me everything, every detail, every contact, every piece of evidence we need, and then help me figure out how to give my daughter a world where impossible things don't have to stay secret." For the first time in months, Sarah Chen felt like herself again, not a homeless mother scraping for survival, but a scientist ready to fight for truth that could change everything. The secure phone felt heavier than it should have in Sarah's hands, its weight somehow containing the gravity of everything she'd just committed to. Wells and Rodriguez exchanged a look that spoke of relief mixed with apprehension, the relief of finding someone willing to carry the burden, and the fear of what that burden might ultimately cost. "First," Wells said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you need to understand what you're really up against. Project Lazarus isn't just a rogue research initiative, it's a fully integrated operation with tentacles reaching into federal agencies, major universities, private corporations, and international governments. The Mammoth you found was disposal evidence from just one of 14 active facilities." Rodriguez pulled up a map on the tablet showing locations across North America, innocuous-looking research centers and industrial complexes that concealed the most ambitious genetic resurrection program in human history. The Bakersfield facility alone has successfully restored 43 individual specimens from 12 extinct species. Each resurrection generates massive amounts of data, physical evidence, and traumatized witnesses. Sarah studied the locations, her paleontology background allowing her to recognize the pattern. They're positioned near fossil-rich geological formations. They're not just resurrecting random specimens, they're targeting specific genetic lines, specific evolutionary branches. Exactly. Wells' expression grew even grimmer. This isn't about bringing back charismatic megafauna for scientific curiosity. They're reconstructing entire evolutionary pathways, testing the psychological limits of consciousness transfer, mapping the boundaries between life and death with military precision. The implications hit Sarah like a series of physical blows. If they could successfully resurrect extinct animals while preserving traumatic memories from the moment of death, the technology's potential applications extended far beyond paleontology. Military applications, intelligence gathering from deceased operatives, interrogation techniques that transcended mortality itself. "You're talking about weaponizing resurrection," she said, her voice hollow with realization. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "The Mammoth you found wasn't terminated for mercy reasons. It was eliminated because Lazarus 7 had begun exhibiting behaviors that suggested it retained not just death memories, but potentially memories from before death, knowledge of its prehistoric environment, migration patterns, social structures, information that had been considered permanently lost to extinction." Sarah's hands began trembling as the full scope of the conspiracy crystallized. The homeless professor who'd lost everything for challenging research protocols was now being asked to expose a project that could revolutionize warfare, intelligence, and the fundamental nature of human existence. The $50 storage auction hadn't just uncovered evidence, it had made her a target in a conflict she was only beginning to understand. Through the restaurant window, she watched Lily showing Agent Morrison pictures in the dinosaur book. Her daughter's innocent enthusiasm, a stark contrast to the earth-shattering revelations unfolding 3 feet away. 8 years old, still young enough to believe in happy endings and simple moral choices. Old enough to become a casualty if her mother's choices went wrong. "The other researchers who agreed to help," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "How many are still alive?" Wells hesitated just long enough for Sarah to understand that the answer was worse than she'd feared. 7 of the original 17 remain active. 3 successfully gathered enough evidence to trigger congressional oversight hearings, but the hearings were classified and the evidence sealed. 4 others disappeared before they could complete their investigations. Disappeared? Car accidents, heart attacks, sudden relocations for family emergencies that left no forwarding addresses. Rodriguez's voice carried the weight of personal loss. My research partner, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, suffered a fatal allergic reaction to medication she'd taken safely for 15 years. 2 days after she'd documented anomalous cellular regeneration in supposedly ancient bone samples. The message was clear. Choosing this path meant accepting the very real possibility that she and Lily might become the next mysterious casualties in a conspiracy that had already claimed multiple lives. But as Sarah looked out at her daughter, she realized something that surprised her with its clarity. She'd already lost everything that could be taken safely. Her career was destroyed, her reputation ruined, her financial security obliterated. The storage auction that was supposed to save their lives had instead revealed that they were already living in a world where impossible truths required systematic murder to maintain. The only choice left was whether to fight back or simply wait for their turn to be eliminated. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked, tucking the secure phone into her jacket pocket with hands that had finally stopped trembling. Wells smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant, a grim expression that held no warmth but considerable respect. "Fast. We have reason to believe that other Lazarus facilities are accelerating their disposal protocols. Too many researchers have started asking questions. Too many anomalous results are surfacing in academic literature. They're moving to eliminate evidence, which means eliminating witnesses, including us. Which means we have perhaps 2 weeks to gather enough corroborated evidence to make disclosure inevitable." Wells stood, her movements precise and purposeful. "Dr. Chen, you've just committed to the most dangerous investigation of your career. I hope you understand that there's no going back from this point." Sarah looked out at Lily one final time, watching her daughter's simple joy in learning about creatures that had walked the earth millions of years ago. Soon, that same child would be living in a world where the boundaries between extinction and existence had been permanently rewritten. The final confrontation wasn't approaching. It had already begun the moment she'd opened that storage unit door. 2 weeks proved optimistic. The secure phone buzzed against Sarah's ribs at 3:17 a.m., dragging her from dreams of mammoth skeletons and Lily's laughter into the stark reality of their cramped motel room. Wells's voice cut through the darkness. With surgical precision, they've accelerated the timeline. Bakersfield facility is being sanitized tonight. If we're going to gather evidence, it has to be now. Sarah's pulse hammered against her throat as she processed the implications. After 5 days of careful planning, secure communications, and coordinating with the scattered resistance network Wells had introduced her to, everything was collapsing into immediate action. The methodical academic approach she'd hoped to employ, careful documentation, peer review, building an unassailable case, had just been replaced by desperate improvisation. "Lily's asleep," Sarah whispered, glancing at her daughter's peaceful form beneath the motel's threadbare covers. "Agent Morrison is en route to provide protection. You have 20 minutes to decide, Dr. Chen. After tonight, there won't be evidence left to gather." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every lesson the past 2 weeks had taught her. The careful cultivation of contacts within the academic community who'd noticed suspicious research restrictions, the painstaking documentation of carbon dating anomalies from researchers across 3 universities, the growing network of scientists who'd begun asking uncomfortable questions about colleagues who'd disappeared after stumbling onto Lazarus-related evidence. All of it would be meaningless if the Bakersfield facility completed its disposal protocols. She thought of Dr. Kim Martinez, who'd risked her career to provide the original carbon dating results that started this investigation. Of Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Rodriguez's research partner, whose convenient allergic reaction had silenced her questions permanently. Of the 17 extinct species that had been brought back only to carry the psychological trauma of remembering their deaths across millennia. But mostly, She thought of Lazarus Seven's intelligent eyes staring out from Wells's tablet, the mammoth that had tried to communicate the experience of extinction before being eliminated for the crime of possessing impossible memories. "I'm in," Sarah said, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised her. "What do you need me to do?" Wells's instructions transformed the night into a series of precise, terrifying objectives. Sarah would provide paleontological expertise to identify and document evidence during the facility infiltration. Her academic credentials would lend credibility to whatever evidence they managed to extract. Most importantly, her understanding of fossil preservation and extraction would help them recognize which specimens contained the most damning proof of recent resurrection. By 4:30 a.m., Sarah found herself crouched behind a chain-link fence that surrounded what appeared to be a standard industrial research complex. The Bakersfield facility looked disappointingly mundane: low concrete buildings, standard security lighting, nothing that would suggest the revolutionary science happening inside its walls. But Wells had taught her to recognize the signs, the specialized ventilation systems, the redundant power supplies, the subtle electromagnetic shielding that protected sensitive equipment. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the earpiece Wells had provided. "Thermal imaging shows disposal operations in Building C. They're moving fast. Accelerated incineration protocols, data purging, specimen elimination. Whatever evidence we're going to find won't exist in 6 hours." Sarah's hands shook as she followed Wells through the gap their contact had created in the perimeter fencing. Every shadow seemed to contain threats, every sound suggested approaching security. But underneath the terror, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: the focused intensity of scientific investigation, the thrill of pursuing truth regardless of personal cost. "Remember," Wells whispered as they approached Building C, "you're looking for specimens showing surgical extraction marks, recent tissue preservation, any documentation that proves resurrection rather than standard fossil recovery. Your expert recognition of these details is the only thing that makes tonight's risk worthwhile." They entered through a service door that their inside contact had left strategically unlocked. The facility's interior shattered any remaining illusions about legitimate research. Rows of containment units lined sterile corridors, each one sized for specimens ranging from small mammals to creatures the size of Lazarus Seven. Most were empty now, their former occupants reduced to ash in industrial incinerators that hummed with continuous operation. But 3 units still contained evidence that would rewrite paleontological understanding forever. Sarah stared at the saber-toothed cat specimen in Unit 7, its preservation so perfect that muscle tissue remained intact, nervous system visible through translucent skin. The surgical extraction marks Wells had taught her to recognize were clearly visible along the skull's temporal region, evidence of memory extraction procedures performed on a creature that had died 10,000 years ago. "Photographing now," she whispered, using the specialized camera equipment Wells had provided. "This is definitely post-mortem surgical intervention." The precision suggests they were mapping neural pathways, possibly extracting memory engrams. Each photograph felt like stealing fire from gods who'd murdered to protect their secrets. But as Sarah documented specimen after specimen, she realized that tonight's infiltration represented something larger than evidence gathering. Every image captured, every measurement recorded, every surgical mark photographed was a step toward forcing humanity to confront questions they weren't prepared to answer. The ultimate test wasn't just about exposing Project Lazarus. It was about whether human civilization could survive learning that death itself had become negotiable. Sarah's camera flash illuminated the saber-toothed cat's preserved neural tissue when the facility's lights suddenly blazed to life around them. Emergency klaxons shattered the silence as security doors began slamming shut throughout the complex, the metallic sounds echoing like gunshots in the sterile corridors. "Dr. Sarah Chen." The voice emerged from hidden speakers with cultured precision, each syllable carefully modulated. the former paleontology professor who lost everything for asking inconvenient questions. How fitting that your curiosity should bring you here tonight. Wells grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the emergency exit, but the reinforced door had already sealed. They were trapped in a containment facility designed to hold creatures that could survive extinction itself, creatures that remembered dying 10,000 years ago. "Dr. Marcus Blackwood," Sarah called out, recognizing the voice from university conferences she'd attended years before. The billionaire tech mogul whose genetic resurrection patents had quietly revolutionized biotechnology while maintaining public invisibility. "I should have known you were behind this." The intercom crackled with what might have been amusement. "Behind it? My dear professor, I am it. Project Lazarus represents the culmination of everything human civilization has struggled toward since we first learned to fear death. And you're attempting to destroy it with amateur photography and misguided moral outrage." Emergency lighting bathed the laboratory in hellish red as Sarah continued documenting evidence, her hands surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. Every photograph might be her final act of scientific rebellion, but she would not waste this opportunity. The saber-toothed cat's surgical marks, the neural extraction sites, the proof that consciousness could survive millennia, all of it had to be recorded. "The mammoth you found was designated Lazarus-7. Blackwood's voice continued, now carrying an edge of genuine anger. 43 successful resurrections, and that one specimen chose to develop inconvenient memories. Do you understand what you've cost us, Dr. Chen? Years of research, millions in funding, breakthrough applications that could revolutionize human existence itself." Wells worked frantically with some kind of electronic device at the sealed exit, but Sarah could see the desperation in her movements. Whatever contacts had gotten them inside weren't coming to extract them. They were alone with the evidence that could change everything if they survived long enough to reveal it. "I've cost you nothing," Sarah said, photographing the giant ground sloth in Unit 9, its preserved organs showing the same surgical intervention patterns. "You've been murdering researchers to protect a conspiracy that treats resurrection like a commodity. How many people have died to keep your precious project secret?" 17. Blackwood's admission carried no shame, only cold calculation. 17 individuals who lacked the vision to understand what we're accomplishing. "Death is humanity's ultimate limitation, Dr. Chen. We've learned to transcend it, to extract memories from extinct consciousness, to map neural pathways across geological time, to bring back species that natural selection eliminated millions of years ago." The containment unit beside Sarah suddenly hummed to life, its cryogenic systems activating with mechanical precision. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see movement. Something large stirring within the preservation matrix, something that should have been dead for 10,000 years, but was opening prehistoric eyes with terrifyingly modern awareness. "The cave bear in Unit 12 has been conscious for 6 months, Blackwood said, his voice now coming from directly behind them. Sarah spun around to see him emerging from a concealed elevator, flanked by security personnel carrying weapons she didn't recognize. Unlike Lazarus-7, this specimen has learned to appreciate its resurrection. "Haven't you, beautiful?" The cave bear's eyes tracked Sarah's movements with intelligence that made her stomach clench. Not the simple awareness of a wild animal, but the calculating recognition of something that remembered extinction and had been forced to live beyond it. The creature that should have been humanity's greatest scientific triumph looked like madness given prehistoric form. "You're torturing them," Sarah whispered, the full horror finally crystallizing. "They remember dying, they remember being extinct, and you're keeping them conscious through that trauma for research purposes. We're expanding the boundaries of existence itself." Blackwood's cultured facade finally cracked, revealing the fanatical obsession beneath. Every extinct species we resurrect, every memory we extract, every boundary we cross brings us closer to defeating death permanently. For every species, Dr. Chen, including our own. Sarah's camera captured the cave bear's surgical scars, the neural interface ports. The evidence that would prove humanity had achieved resurrection at the cost of inflicting eternal psychological torture on creatures that had earned peaceful extinction. But as Blackwood's security team raised their weapons, she realized the most important photograph would be the one documenting her own death, unless she could find a way to ensure the evidence survived, even if she didn't. The cave bear's container began opening with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like prehistoric breath returning to impossible lungs. The cave bear's massive frame unfolded from the containment unit with movements that carried 10,000 years of remembered death. Sarah's finger found the camera's emergency transmission button, the fail-safe Wells had installed that would upload everything to their network contacts if activated. But using it meant sacrificing any chance of escape, burning through the device's battery in a single massive data burst that would leave them defenseless. "The choice is simple, Dr. Chen," Blackwood said, his security team maintaining their positions as the prehistoric predator stretched muscles that had been extinct since the last ice age. "Delete your photographs and walk away, or join the 17 researchers who couldn't appreciate the larger vision." Sarah looked at Wells, seeing her own desperate calculation reflected in the agent's eyes. They had documentation of surgical torture performed on resurrected extinct species, proof that consciousness could survive millennia of death, evidence that would force humanity to confront impossible questions about the nature of existence itself. But only if someone lived to reveal it. "Lily," Sarah whispered, thinking of her daughter asleep in the motel room, protected by agents who might not even know their operation had been compromised. Everything she'd fought for, every sacrifice she'd made since losing her university position, had led to this moment where victory and destruction balanced on the same knife edge. The cave bear's intelligent gaze fixed on her with recognition that made her soul recoil. This creature remembered being hunted to extinction by early humans, remembered the terror of its species' final moments, and now it was being used as an instrument of revenge against humanity by the very people who'd forced it to relive that trauma. "You want to defeat death?" Sarah said, her thumb hovering over the transmission button. "Then let me show you what it actually costs." She pressed the button and felt her camera's battery die as terabytes of evidence began uploading through Wells's encrypted network. Every photograph of surgical intervention on extinct species, every image of neural extraction ports and consciousness mapping procedures, every piece of documentation that proved Project Lazarus had achieved resurrection through systematic torture. Blackwood's composure finally shattered. Kill them both. Retrieve the camera. But Sarah was already moving, not toward escape, but toward the cave bear's containment unit. Wells shouted something behind her, but Sarah's world had narrowed to a single desperate gamble. If Blackwood's creatures retained memories of extinction, they might also remember who was responsible for their current suffering. "You remember dying," Sarah said to the cave bear, her voice carrying every ounce of paleontological authority she possessed. "You remember your species being hunted to extinction, but do you remember who brought you back to experience that death again and again?" The prehistoric predator's head swiveled toward Blackwood with recognition that transcended 10,000 years of evolutionary separation. Its massive frame tensed with predatory focus that had been extinct since the Pleistocene era but was now very much alive in the sterile laboratory. Security weapons fired, but Sarah had already thrown herself behind the containment unit's reinforced base as the cave bear exploded into motion. 800 pounds of resurrected fury struck Blackwood's security team with the accumulated rage of an entire extinct species. The sounds that followed belonged to nightmares, not just the physical violence but the psychological terror of facing a creature that had learned to hate its own resurrection. Wells grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the exit that was somehow opening again. "The upload triggered our extraction protocol. Move!" Sarah stumbled after her, but couldn't resist one final look back. Blackwood stood among the chaos of his destroyed security team, his face illuminated by emergency lighting that made him look like a figure from prehistoric cave paintings. The cave bear watched them both with eyes that held 10,000 years of accumulated wisdom about the relationship between predator and prey. "This isn't over, Dr. Chen," Blackwood's voice carried across the laboratory as alarms screamed through the facility. "You've doomed your daughter. You've doomed everyone you've ever cared about." Sarah's legs carried her through corridors that blurred past in emergency lighting and adrenaline, but her mind remained fixed on the sacrifice she'd just made. The evidence was uploading to contacts across 3 continents, but she'd also ensured that Lily would grow up as the daughter of the woman who'd exposed humanity's darkest scientific achievement. The cost of victory was becoming clear as Wells pushed her through the facility's shattered perimeter into the pre-dawn darkness. She'd saved the evidence that could change everything, but she'd also guaranteed that Lily would inherit a world where the boundaries between life and death had been permanently destroyed. Behind them, the sounds of prehistoric fury continued to echo through the Bakersfield facility as 10,000-year-old rage finally found appropriate targets. The revolution had begun, but Sarah Chen was no longer sure which species would survive it. The pre-dawn air hit Sarah's lungs like ice water, shocking her system back to immediate reality after the sterile horror of Blackwood's laboratory. Wells pulled her across the industrial parking lot toward a nondescript sedan, but Sarah's legs felt disconnected from her body, as if the adrenaline that had carried her through the facility was finally abandoning her to face what she'd actually done. "Get in," Wells commanded, but her voice carried an edge of uncertainty that hadn't been there during the infiltration. They were both processing the same impossible truth. They'd succeeded in documenting humanity's darkest scientific achievement, but success felt nothing like victory. Sarah collapsed into the passenger seat, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't fasten her seatbelt. Behind them, emergency lights strobed through the facility's windows as prehistoric rage continued its systematic destruction of everything Blackwood had built. The sounds carried across the parking lot, not just the crash of equipment and the screams of alarms, but something deeper, the roar of creatures that had learned to hate their own resurrection. "The evidence uploaded successfully," Wells said, checking her phone as they pulled onto the empty highway. "Encrypted copies are already reaching our contacts in London, Geneva, and Tokyo. By morning, every major scientific institution and media outlet will have documentation of Project Lazarus." Sarah nodded, but the triumph Wells expected didn't materialize. Instead, she felt hollow, scraped clean by the magnitude of what she'd unleashed. The photographs would prove that humanity had achieved resurrection through torture, that consciousness could survive geological time, that the boundaries between life and death had been shattered in the name of scientific progress. But proof and wisdom were entirely different things. "Lily," Sarah whispered, the name emerging like a prayer. "I need to see Lily." The motel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and fear when they arrived 20 minutes later. Agent Rodriguez met them at the door, her expression grim with the kind of news that transforms victory into ash. Sarah's heart stopped before Rodriguez even spoke. "Your daughter is safe," Rodriguez said quickly, recognizing the panic in Sarah's eyes. "But Blackwood's people found the motel. We had to extract her to a secure location. She's asking for you." The secure location turned out to be a safe house in a residential neighborhood that looked aggressively normal. Suburban lawns, minivans in driveways, the kind of calculated mundanity that screamed federal protection. Sarah found Lily in the living room, still wearing the pajamas from their last normal night together, clutching the stuffed mammoth that had become her talisman through months of homelessness. "Mommy?" Lily's voice carried the particular fragility of a child who'd been woken by strangers and told her life was in danger. "The lady said you were helping with important work. Are we going to be okay?" Sarah gathered her daughter into her arms, breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence that felt impossibly precious after witnessing the resurrection of extinct nightmares. How could she explain that Mummy had just documented proof that death itself had become negotiable, that the world Lily would inherit had been permanently changed by tonight's revelations? "We're going to be okay," Sarah said, the lie emerging with parental authority that surprised her. But as she held Lily against her chest, she realized it might not be a lie after all. They'd survived the immediate danger. The evidence was spreading beyond Blackwood's ability to suppress, and somewhere in the Bakersfield facility, creatures that had suffered resurrection were finally taking revenge against their tormentors. Wells appeared in the doorway, her phone buzzing with encrypted updates. Initial responses are coming in. The Royal Society is convening an emergency session. Harvard's calling for immediate peer review. The Vatican wants to know if we have theological implications data. Everyone's demanding independent verification, but they're treating the evidence as authentic. Sarah nodded, but her attention remained focused on Lily's steady breathing against her shoulder. The scientific revolution was beginning, just as she'd hoped. But the personal cost was becoming clear in ways she hadn't anticipated. Lily would grow up as the daughter of the woman who'd proven that extinction could be reversed, that consciousness could survive geological time, that the natural order was far more fragile than humanity had ever imagined. "What happens next?" Sarah asked Wells, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Congressional hearings, international tribunals, every extinct species preservation group demanding access to resurrection technology, every religious organization questioning whether we've proven the existence of souls or just demonstrated that death is neurochemical rather than spiritual. Wells paused, recognizing the overwhelming nature of what they'd unleashed. The world changes, Dr. Chen, permanently. Through the safe-house windows, Sarah could see the first hints of dawn breaking over suburban California. The same sun that had risen over woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats, over cave bears and giant ground sloths, over every species that had ever faced extinction and accepted the peace of final rest. But now extinction itself had been compromised, and Sarah Chen, former paleontology professor, homeless mother, accidental revolutionary, had ensured that humanity would never again take comfort in the permanence of death. The immediate conflict was over, but the larger questions had only begun. The return. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her new apartment, watching Lily arrange plastic dinosaurs on the coffee table with the careful precision of a child who'd learned that security was something to be treasured rather than assumed. The federal witness protection stipend had secured them a modest 2-bedroom in Sacramento, far from Bakersfield, far from the storage auction that had changed everything, but still close enough to the life they'd lost that Sarah sometimes forgot how fundamentally different she'd become. "The Triceratops is the mama," Lily explained, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she'd developed when discussing prehistoric life. "She protects the babies from the scary ones." Sarah smiled, recognizing herself in her daughter's need to impose order on ancient chaos. But the innocence that had once characterized Lily's dinosaur games had been tempered by experience. She arranged her plastic creatures with the understanding of someone who'd learned that the world contained real monsters, and that sometimes the scariest predators wore human faces. The morning news played softly from the kitchen television, delivering updates that had become routine over the past 12 weeks. Congressional hearings on resurrection ethics, international treaties governing extinct species research, the ongoing manhunt for Marcus Blackwood, who'd vanished the night his facility was destroyed, leaving behind only security footage of prehistoric creatures systematically dismantling everything he'd built. Dr. Elena Rodriguez from Stanford called every Tuesday, updating Sarah on the scientific community's response to the Lazarus documentation. Peer review had confirmed the evidence's authenticity. Independent investigations had uncovered similar facilities in Montana and Alaska. The Vatican had issued a statement acknowledging that consciousness appeared to survive physical death, while carefully avoiding conclusions about what that meant for human souls. But the most significant change wasn't in the external world. It was in the woman Sarah had become. She caught glimpses of herself in mirrors and recognized someone fundamentally altered by the knowledge she'd acquired. The homeless desperation was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Purpose, perhaps, or simply the weight of understanding that some boundaries once crossed could never be rebuilt. "Mummy?" Lily looked up from her dinosaur arrangement, her expression carrying the particular seriousness that had developed since their ordeal began. "Do you think the real mammoths are happy they came back?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. She'd spent months testifying before congressional committees, explaining the technical aspects of resurrection technology to people who couldn't comprehend its implications. But her 6-year-old daughter had cut straight to the heart of everything that mattered. "I don't think so, sweetheart," Sarah said, settling onto the couch beside Lily. "I think they remembered being scared, and nobody asked if they wanted to remember." Lily nodded solemnly, moving the plastic mammoth away from the other creatures. "Sometimes I dream about being scared and can't wake up. Is that what happened to them?" Sarah's throat tightened. She'd been so focused on the scientific and political ramifications of Project Lazarus that she'd failed to fully consider the psychological trauma inflicted on creatures forced to relive their own extinction. But Lily, with the clarity that sometimes accompanied childhood, understood something the experts had missed. "Yes," Sarah whispered, pulling her daughter closer. "That's exactly what happened to them." They sat in comfortable silence, watching morning light stream through windows that no longer required bulletproof glass. Agent Wells still called weekly, updating them on security protocols that were gradually relaxing as Blackwood's network was systematically dismantled. Sarah had testified before her last congressional committee 2 weeks ago. The Witness Protection Program would officially end next month, allowing them to reclaim their real identities and build something resembling normal lives. But normalcy felt like a foreign concept to someone who documented proof that death was negotiable. Sarah Chen had entered that storage auction as a desperate mother hoping to find something valuable enough to buy her daughter a decent meal. She'd emerged as the woman who'd proven that extinction could be reversed, that consciousness transcended physical death, that the natural order was far more fragile than humanity had ever imagined. The phone rang, displaying Wells's number. Sarah answered, expecting another routine security update, but the agent's voice carried unusual tension. "Dr. Chen, we've received an unusual request. There's someone who wants to meet with you, someone whose expertise might help you understand the full implications of what you uncovered." "Who?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted more implications to understand. "Dr. Margaret Foster. She was Blackwood's original research partner before she discovered what Project Lazarus was actually doing to the resurrected specimens. She's been in hiding for 2 years, but your testimony convinced her to come forward." Sarah looked at Lily, still arranging plastic creatures with the careful attention of someone who understood that life and death were more complicated than most adults realized. Her daughter would grow up in a world where resurrection was possible, where the boundaries between species and eras had been permanently compromised, where every extinct creature potentially carried memories of its own demise. "When?" Sarah asked Wells, knowing she would agree to the meeting despite every instinct that screamed for them to disappear into suburban anonymity. "Tomorrow. She says she has information about Blackwood's current location. And Dr. Chen? She says she knows how to undo what was done to the resurrected specimens, how to give them peace." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of unwanted destiny settling around her shoulders like a familiar coat. She'd thought her part in this story was finished, but the woman who'd entered that storage auction no longer existed. In her place stood someone who'd seen too much to ever truly rest. The return was complete, but the journey was far from over, the new beginning. 6 months after that phone call, Sarah stood before a classroom of graduate students at UC Davis, her hands steady as she gestured toward the holographic display showing mammoth DNA sequences. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd lost her original teaching position over a research scandal, only to return to academia as the woman who'd exposed the greatest scientific conspiracy in human history. "The ethical implications of de-extinction technology," she said, watching her students lean forward with the intensity she remembered from her own graduate days, "cannot be separated from the consciousness studies that emerged from the Lazarus documentation. When we resurrect a species, we're not just rebuilding genetic material, We were potentially forcing sentient beings to relive their extinction trauma. A student raised her hand. Dr. Chen, what happened to the specimens Dr. Foster helped you identify? Sarah paused, remembering the heartbreak of those final months working with Margaret Foster. They'd located 17 facilities across North America where Blackwood's network had continued resurrection experiments. But by the time they'd developed the neurological intervention protocols that could grant the creatures peaceful rest, most of the specimens had already died, some from stress, others from what could only be described as despair. We were able to help 38 individual creatures transition peacefully, Sarah said. The cave bears, the dire wolves, the saber-toothed cats, they all carried memories of their species' extinction. Dr. Foster's work proved that consciousness doesn't just survive death, it can be traumatized by the experience of dying and forced to endure that trauma repeatedly through resurrection. The classroom fell silent. Sarah had learned that this moment came in every lecture, the point where theoretical science collided with the reality of suffering on a scale that transcended geological time. After class, Sarah found Lily waiting in the hallway, now 7 and wise beyond her years. The witness protection had ended, but they'd chosen to stay in Northern California, building a new life that acknowledged how fundamentally they'd both changed. Lily attended the university's childcare program while Sarah taught, and sometimes sat quietly in the back of undergraduate lectures, absorbing discussions of extinction and ethics with the seriousness of someone who'd seen those concepts made real. "Mummy, did you help the scared animals today?" Lily asked as they walked across campus. It was her way of asking whether Sarah's work was moving toward something that mattered, whether the sacrifice they'd made had been worthwhile. "I'm trying, sweetheart. Every day I'm trying." They stopped at their favorite bench overlooking the quad, a ritual that had developed over months of rebuilding trust in routine. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Wells, now her close friend rather than her protection agent. Blackwood spotted in Romania. Interpol moving in. "You should know, he's been attempting to restart resurrection research." Sarah showed Lily a video Wells had attached, a news report about Blackwood's capture at a facility outside Bucharest. The man who'd tortured extinct species in the name of scientific progress stood in handcuffs, diminished by months of running, his grandiose visions of controlling death reduced to a desperate flight from consequences. "He looks sad," Lily observed with the startling empathy that sometimes caught Sarah off guard. "Do you think he ever understood why the animals were angry?" The question struck deeper than any congressional hearing or peer review committee. Sarah realized that Lily, who'd grown up witnessing the aftermath of resurrection trauma, understood something that had eluded even the experts. Blackwood's greatest failure wasn't scientific, it was imaginative. He'd never considered that consciousness might include the capacity for suffering, that resurrection might be experienced as violation rather than gift. "No, sweetheart, I don't think he ever understood that." As evening settled over the campus, they walked home to the apartment that had become more than shelter. It was proof that they'd survived the transformation that began with a $50 storage auction. Sarah cooked dinner while Lily arranged homework alongside her plastic dinosaurs, the extinct and the academic coexisting in the casual way that had become normal for them. The world had changed permanently. Resurrection technology was now regulated by international treaty. Dr. Foster headed a new research institute focused on consciousness studies and extinction ethics. The creatures they'd been able to save had taught humanity that death might be a mercy rather than a tragedy, that some boundaries existed for reasons deeper than technological limitation. But the most profound change was personal. Sarah Chen had entered that storage unit as a desperate mother gambling her last $50 on survival. She'd emerged as someone who understood that survival and victory were entirely different things, that some knowledge came at costs that couldn't be calculated until they'd already been paid. Looking at Lily, bent over her homework with the focused determination of someone who'd learned that security was precious, Sarah felt something she'd almost forgotten: contentment. Not the desperate relief of immediate crisis survived, but the deeper satisfaction of having chosen correctly, when choosing had mattered most. They'd lost everything to find what couldn't be taken away. The beginning was complete,